And happy Tuesday, NCAA fans. This is your weekly Trogcast. You really old guys talking NCAA basketball, and what a week it has been. Before we get to that, we will, as always, welcome to the show my good buddy, the other part of the True Really Old Men, Jim Reaker. Very, very frosty day, and it seems to be a little frosty across the NCAA.
Oh, yeah. Happy New Year, Jeff. Crazy weekend, and I don't know. I think this is just going to be one of those years that we're going to be saying that every week. I think just looking through some of our conference picks that we made at the beginning of the season, we've talked about maybe updating them, but, man, it's just hard to even make a pick in some of these conferences. It's hard to say which way they're going to go. There's so many teams and so much parity, I think. What do you think's going on? Why do we have this? I mean, in fact, throw out, I'm sure you read, first time, and I wasn't quite clear, first time at least since 1948-1949 season that we didn't have an undefeated team going into the new year of the season like we are right now. That's a long time. What's going on?
I know all four of the remaining unbeatens fell over the weekend, same day on Saturday afternoon massacre. I think you hit the word right, the parity. Even in the day of the one and done, you're never sure if those one and dones are going to come to fruition. You look at what Markelle Fultz wasn't able to do in Washington, or Ben Simmons wasn't able to do in LSU. You got Michael Porter Jr. hurt at Missouri when they thought he would have such an impact. And sometimes you just what you think is going to happen doesn't happen. And as we said last year, sure you remember several times, Jim, before North Carolina won their latest NCAA championship, it has to do with senior leadership. And I think as much talk as there is about these kids that come and only stay for a year or two, it's still the kids that spend 3 or 4 years at the university that make the biggest impact, maybe not the biggest splash, but the biggest impact. And sometimes we don't know what they're going to do or how they're going to affect the season, because it does take them 2 or 3 years to really mature into their roles at these different universities.
Yeah, and I think there's one other factor. I agree, parity is it, and I believe you've hit on something very, very important, leadership, because, yeah, you can have great players, and kind of to that effect, you look at UK this year. I don't have any, returning players really, maybe a couple with a couple years of experience. But if you go to UK, they're an excellent example. Last time they actually won a national championship, even though they have all those stars, was a year they had a couple 4-year players there that provided that leadership. But the other factor I think is true now is, and I think it's because of the NCAA selection committee, they have basically said in some of their selections in the last few years, you need to play somebody in your non-conference schedule. You can't take the Syracuse route. I remember Syracuse used to do this all the time. They wouldn't even play away from Syracuse. They'd bring in all these cupcakes. They would build up this resume of wins, but not necessarily playing anyone. And the NCAA started to say to these teams, you got to play somebody. So I think part of the reason, again, we have every team with at least a loss, is I think they're scheduling tougher. It's better to go out and schedule some tough games, maybe on the road. Almost everybody goes to those neutral site tournaments now. And it's okay to lose a game before Christmas as long as you're playing somebody and you do have some big wins as part of that resume. So I think those are the two factors, in my opinion, that have come to fruition in this 17-18 season.
Well, to add to what you just said, I don't think a lot of these coaches mind that at all, because they know what it's going to do for them coming down the road, as we've said in many of our Trog casts and our Razor casts so far this year. They're happy to play those games early, maybe take a loss or two, because they know where they're going to be when it comes time for March and April, and that's really what they're looking at. They don't really care, some of these coaches, what the rankings are, and I'm a big advocate for that. I've said rankings, schmankings, I don't know how many times. They've kind of settled into place who the top ones are now. So I think that's very true. But I also think there's just enough talent to go around that you can't, as you've said many times, you're going to have a bad day, the other guy's going to have a good day. When you have a team like Wofford beating North Carolina, and the kicking dog of the ACC, Boston College beating Duke, all of these teams in the NCAA have enough talent, especially in the Big Six or 6.5 conferences, if you want to throw the AAC in there this year with Wichita State coming in, or even the West Coast Conference with Gonzaga and St. Mary's, but they're down. I mean, so many of these Big Six conferences have got so much talent top to bottom that it's almost a shame that some of them can't go to the NCAA because they're in those different conferences.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. I mean, just look at the scores, and I don't even have a stat to back this up, but I would guess it just seems like the scores are so much higher. I mean, take, for example, the Butler team scoring 103 points against Villanova. I think the NBA philosophy and some of the ways they play the game, especially with the three-point shot, I think has trickled down into the NCAA, and I think it's good for the fans. I think even though you know defense is going to win it in the end, I think the fans like to watch a big offensive game. That's why the NBA has become much more popular in the last few years, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is. It is a very exciting thing to watch, and you hit on it with a couple of examples, and let's try to get to it as we tab up our third number one of the season, Michigan State, back up there, and that's a team that kind of has done that advocacy that you're talking about of playing a tough schedule. It kind of hurt them last year, kind of the way UCLA traveling all over the place hurt them this year. But Tom Izzo's got them in the number one spot in what is, you've said is a down Big Ten. But let's sort of go through conference by conference and see if you want to make any adjustments in your predictions or just talk about this wild week that we just had in each of them. Who do you want to start with?
Well, you talked about Michigan State. Let's start with the Big Ten. And here's my take on the Big Ten. I believe you probably have the notes to prove me wrong or right, but I believe I actually picked Michigan State, not a hard pick. Them being number one, that's not a hard pick. Also, their only loss was to Duke, who again is in the top four. I think they're 3 or 4, and that was a very, very early game. So Michigan State, they deserve to be number one. The team that, and I go back and forth. I almost want to say that I think Purdue might win that league. I've seen Purdue play a couple times. I've seen Michigan State play a couple times. Purdue just seems to have a more complete team right now than the Spartans. I've said it before, I'm not a big Purdue fan, but I'm going to give them their due. And they actually, go back to what we were talking about, their only 2 losses came on back-to-back days in one of those holiday classics. I think they lost to Tennessee and maybe Western Kentucky, and the Western Kentucky loss was probably just coming right after the Tennessee loss. They couldn't recover in a day's rest, and that's probably why they lost that. So it's going to be between those 2, I think. Ohio State might have something to say about it. They're a little more impressive than people thought they would be with that late change, but obviously Coach Holtzman there is doing a good job. It's going to come out, I think, I was looking this coming Sunday, Michigan State at Ohio State. That's going to be a big early game for them. The only other, Maryland lost a big-time player out for the year. But that middle's going to be about the same. We've talked about it, Iowa, Indiana, Maryland in there. So that's the way I see the Big Ten. Okay, if I have to, I'm going to change my pick. I'm going to say Purdue's going to win it. And that may be a shock because Michigan State is ranked number 1. But again, I've watched them, and I just don't think they're quite as a complete team as Purdue is. So it'll be a fun league to watch as it gets cranked up here. And again, remember they've already played 2 games for some odd reason. It's kind of weird. They played that first week of December, and then they're one of the later leagues to get back to league play. There hasn't been any. I don't think there's been any league games. And those start, maybe even tonight. I think there might be some Big Ten games starting.
Well, you bring up a good point. Pretty much this year it's Michigan State, Purdue, and the rest, and I'm with you. We'll find out on Sunday about Ohio State, which is rejuvenated a little bit under Chris Holtman. The quirky thing, as you've mentioned many times about some of these schedules, is the Purdue and Michigan State are only going to play once, and that's not until the middle of February, so they're not going to have a home and home to try to get at each other, and that could very well decide it. But the two very good teams, but you also have some surprises in there. Nebraska's knocked off a couple of people. Northwestern isn't as good as they hoped they'd be, Indiana's got a couple of good wins, but can't seem to beat the people they're supposed to. So I think the Big Ten's going to be a jumble throughout the year. Like I said, they've only got 2 teams in the top 25, and that's pretty much where it's going to stay unless somebody can really make an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me pick on one here, and I'll go to my what I think right now is my weaker division, which is the Pac-12. They've got the number 3 team and the number 14 team, and they just played each other with Arizona, showing that they're not going to be easily overtaken by these rogue Sun Devils out of Arizona State. The first thing that I would say about that is I think that is great for the Pac-12. The Pac-12 sort of set up on rivalries. Washington State, Oregon State. You got Cal, Stanford, USC, and UCLA, all sort of geographically there. But you never really talk much about Arizona State and Arizona in basketball. So what Bobby Hurley's doing there is going to be great if they can keep that going. But again, they're down. UCLA traveled all over the globe, and even though they had a good win against Kentucky the other day, they just haven't looked good in some of the other games, and Cincinnati just beat the snot out of them. And we'll see what they can do by the end of the season. And Oregon, obviously, is going to be down from the Final Four team that we saw last year, and I don't see anybody else really popping up in that league. So I'm going to stick with my prediction, which was that Arizona, didn't look good after those holiday tournaments where they dropped 3, but they've been stellar since then. But a lot of good teams in there that could show their colors as they come through. All but Stanford came away with a winning record in their pre-conference. But I'm going to stick with Sean Miller and the Arizona Wildcats out there in the West.
I think that's a wise choice. I've seen the Wildcats play a couple times. And, of course, you got Lonzo Trier, is it, from coming back from last year, who was a dominant force. And then they got this other guy. I'm looking for it. You probably maybe know Ayton. Is that how you say it?
DeAndre Ayton. Mm-hmm.
He is a monster.
They got 2 7-footers in there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would agree with you. Arizona, and again, look at what they lost 3 games in 3 successive days, somewhere in the Bahamas or somewhere. I don't know. I think that's just again what we were talking about earlier. I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. They're going to probably be the dominant team coming out of the West. So I agree with that choice. Yeah. Well, let me jump to maybe one of my best, although I got two big ones left. But let's go to the Big 12. And now, again, I like this. I like my last 2 conferences. 10 teams, everybody plays everybody. 9 at home, 9 away, 18 games, fair, true champion. And, again, I went with Kansas, I believe, is who I picked to – no, I didn't. I believe I said that someone would win other than them, and I think I probably picked West Virginia at the beginning of the season. And that's a pretty good pick because they lost their opening game to Texas A&M. Again, was in Germany at some Air Force base, and they've rolled off 13 games or wins since. So I really think the Mountaineers and Bob Huggins, and I think they're ranked 6 right now. They're knocking on the top 5. I think they're going to probably end Kansas' streak of winning. They're going for their 14th straight Big 12. And the other team, of course, who I've been very impressed with is Oklahoma with Trae Young, who's leading the nation in scoring and assists, just putting up just silly numbers. Having a double-double almost every night. And I've seen him play a little bit. He is a force to be reckoned with. I'm not sure he quite has maybe the supporting cast to carry the Sooners on his back by himself. And Kansas is starting to play a little bit better now, and you knew that was going to happen with Bill Self. They're still, I think, waiting on that freshman Billy Preston. I'm not quite sure what his issues are, but he has not been playing, and they thought they would have him by now. So I'm going to say that West Virginia is probably – but that one, you go all the way through that one. That 1 through 10, it's almost like anybody can beat anybody on any given night. You know, you have Texas A&M thrown in there. You have Kansas State thrown in there. Baylor, who has kind of slipped a little bit, but still they're a force to be reckoned with. So that's going to be a fun one to watch through the year. And but I'm going to, and again, not one of my favorite teams, not one of my favorite coaches, but I'm going to say that the Mountaineers are going to maybe pull off their first Big 12 championship in basketball.
Well, it's going to be, I'll just correct one thing. I think you meant to say Texas Christian, Texas A&M being in the SEC, which is one of mine. But just so we don't get nasty letters from fans or comments or tweets, which we'll take anyway because it means somebody's listening. But the Big 12, you got number 6, number 7, number 10, number 16, number 18. Baylor slipped to number 26 after a loss. They've also got the number 31 team in there when you look at the AP, which is Texas, which I think is a bit of a sleeper for that group. But I'm with you, and it's a big week. I'm kind of stealing a little thunder from our next segment, but lots of big games in the Big 12 in this next week, which will help things settle in. And one of those that you alluded to is Oklahoma having to go to West Virginia this Saturday. So we might find out if Oklahoma's for real against the vaunted Bob Huggins defense, and we'll talk about that in our next segment with a lot of exciting games to come up before the next time we're on our Trogcast. Next one I'm going to go to, it's usually it was a very strong conference last year. It's been kind of quiet this year, and that's the SEC. I mean, when I got on at the beginning of the year, it looked like this was going to be a group pounding again, but right now they've kind of slipped. They do still have 3 in the top 25, but they're all in the latter part of it. Kentucky's the highest at 17, and then they've got Arkansas, which just popped in, and Tennessee. But it just hasn't been the conference in the past. Florida's down. We knew South Carolina with Frank Martin was going to be down because he had so many older kids in that great run they had in the tournament last year. But the SEC just seems to be out there floundering, and I'm not really sure, what's going on. Kentucky gets beat up, like I said earlier, by UCLA, and nobody really seems to want to step forward with this group. It's really hard to pick at this point. I think I said I got to remember I was sort of going back and forth between Kentucky taking it again and Mike White getting the Florida Gators up there. A little disappointed in the Gators start, but I think I almost have to stick with Kentucky by default. But there's going to be a lot of dogs nipping at their heels, which they can't. Alabama is really big on them and Avery Johnson at the beginning of the year, and they seem to fall to teams that they should beat. Like say Florida's not doing as well, and then we have the reemergence of Arkansas. Even Texas A&M, losing their first game in the SEC to end their sort of run. So it's a really, really tough one to track. But you've got a pack of teams there that could be in the mix: Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, Florida, Texas A&M, Tennessee, which is going to make it a fun conference to watch. It's just hard to pick. But so for that reason, I'll stick with my pick, which I'm pretty sure was Kentucky. I'd have to go back to check my notes, but I think it's anybody's ball game in the SEC this year.
Yeah, I did remember because it was Alabama that beat Texas A&M this week. Now, I did read, and I don't have specifics on it, I don't know if you, but Texas A&M, I guess, has a couple injuries or are playing a little bit short there on some of their starters, and that might be the reason. But I do remember you being a high praiser of Alabama, and I believe that a lot of the experts are saying that Alabama might be a force to be reckoned with as Avery Johnson starts to get things solidified here going into the league championship or the league play, so to speak. All right, let's look at the Big East. Villanova going down to Butler. And again, maybe shouldn't have been that surprised in the fact I didn't realize, but it was true. Butler actually beat Villanova twice last year. They beat them at Hinkle Fieldhouse, and they actually went to Villanova and won. So I guess we shouldn't have been that surprised. maybe we're more surprised that Butler is playing again up to that level that they've played for the past few years with the late coaching change. But it seems that the Butler way is taking place. But I picked, I believe, Villanova. Xavier, of course, has had a great start to their year with their only loss to Arizona State out in the desert out at Las Vegas. Seton Hall, who's had a couple losses that have kind of been head scratchers. Rutgers, but that was a rivalry game. But I watched Seton Hall, though I watched them the other night play St. John's, and St. John's actually, both their starting guards, talking Samari Pons and Lovett's the other one. His first name's not Conde. Both of them are hurt right now, and Seton Hall only had about a 5 or 6 point win over St. John's at home. But I look at Seton Hall with Kadeen Carrington, Desi Rodriguez, and Angel Delgado. Angel Delgado is a monster, and he is a rebounding machine, and he is just scary. And the three of those, seems like all three of them have been around for about 6 years. That's why I think they're going to be good here. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with, if not in the Big East, but also when it comes to March, just because they have so much experience and so much leadership on that team. I think it's going to play out when things come to fruition. But I'm going to change my pick. I'm going to go with the Musketeers. They're going to get it done this time. They're going to win. They're going to be the first team in the new Big East, as you refer to it sometimes, to take that crown away from the Villanova Wildcats. I think they got a little bit of a chink in their armor, although they're awful good. And, we're talking last week, I think the Big East in some places are getting 8 out of their 10 teams in the NCAA by some of the experts. I don't know if that'll come to fruition. But look at what DePaul did. DePaul came in and pushed Xavier to the limit and had the Musketeers down by 16 points in the second half. I think that was more Xavier's doing than DePaul's maybe, or just a combination. Although Max Strus, a guy that the Musketeers wanted, and we'll talk probably more about this on Thursday when we go to our Razor Cast, which is all things Xavier basketball. Max Strus, who the Xavier Musketeers tried to get themselves, he was a Division II All-American at Lewis University. He put up, I think it ended up with 33 points against the Musketeers. So DePaul, they're gonna win some games. The bottom is coming up fast, and that's going to be a fun conference to watch because, again, there's going to be a lot of moving up and down. And I say they're going to get at least 6 teams, and it'd be nice if they got their 8, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I'm going to go with my favorite, the Xavier Musketeers, to actually end that Villanova streak.
Well, that's not that bold of talk from the guy that bleeds blue, but I can get you there, and that's great. You talk about Seton Hall. They did have that win against Creighton just the other day, and that helped them very much because Creighton was number 25 at the time, so you got them right on the bubble. They're one of 3 teams in the top 20, 25 for them. The thing about what you're talking about, I know everybody's probably looking to that big game next Thursday on the 10th, next Wednesday, a week from tomorrow, where I'm getting my days wrong here. I'm kind of thinking I'm still on Monday with the holiday. But, everybody's looking at, Xavier, Villanova, thinking they both be in the top 5, and that would be a big showdown in the Big East. But then you have the Butler Bulldogs who come through and knock off Villanova. Laval Jordan's doing a great job there coming down from Green Bay, but Butler's been there before. And that's a team Xavier has to face tonight, and I know you'll be there. So not only that, the Muskies can't look too far ahead to that first match with Villanova, because then they got to also travel to a tough Providence team before that. So as the Big East always is, it's going to be slug them out. And like you just said, DePaul taking Xavier to the mat, and also they have a tough game starting off with Marquette. You just know the Big East is going to be topsy-turvy, but come tournament time, as you mentioned, and that's what you need to remember about the Seton Hall Pirates, come tournament time, you don't want to play them in the Big East tournament. They just find a way to succeed in there and then move on. So, X, I think, is a good choice, but a lot of games, I think we're going to see, the rinse cycle and repeat there in the Big East for all season, and we'll talk more about that, like you say, on Thursday. But I'm sure you probably got a couple of comments before I move on to the ACC.
Well, yeah, and also just to mention this, that I didn't realize this. In fact, I think I misspoke on our Razorcast last week. Butler actually beat Xavier in both of their games last year in the regular season. Xavier did win a game in the Big East tournament against the Bulldogs, and that again helped propel them, as they were supposedly one of the last teams to actually get in the NCAA and made that run to the Final Eight. But yeah, looking forward to that game tonight. I've heard Chris Mack say this, and, it may be coach speak, but I think it's very true, and I think his players are starting to get it. You can't look very far down the road in the Big East. You got to look at your next game, because whoever your next opponent is, it's going to be a tough game, whether it's at home or on the road. So hopefully the Musketeers don't look too far down the road. Another factor that, is going to take place, especially this comes to mind when we talk about Xavier, is you never know how certain things hopefully they don't happen, but somewhere along the line somebody's probably going to get hurt. Team in all these leagues, we're talking about how they're going to be so close and competitive this year that injuries or other incidents that take place off the court sometimes affect how things go during these years. But we hope that everybody stays healthy, but we know that's probably not going to be true.
Yeah, you're right, and that's exactly the way you want to put it. You hope everybody stays healthy and you get a chance, but we also know something's going to happen. That leads me to my last one, which is the ACC. And for a team as strong, they kind of had their stumble the week before. Like, this was like the Big Ten. They started their conference games before anybody else, and that's when Boston College was able to knock off Duke and from their top notch, and they're undefeated. And also you got a team like Wofford, who has knocked off UNC. So they kind of had their upsets before we got into this wild last weekend. And it seems to me that the ACC is almost eerily quiet. They got the number 2, number 8, number 12, number 15, number 24, and 25 teams. So they have as many people in the top 25 as anybody else has. In fact, even one more than the Big 12, even though they don't have as many close like the Big 12 does. But here's something that might scare you just a little bit. They have 12 of their 15 teams that already have double-digit victories. And again, these aren't teams that are going to play cupcakes. They're just not allowed to do it anymore. And you got a team that's real quiet like Louisville, which with all of its problems, one of the things I'd say was it's sad that the Kentucky-Louisville game last week got almost no press, which is usually one of the biggest games of the year. But you got a team like Boston College, which is playing really well and not known for much. Notre Dame's sort of been up and down. Syracuse is even in the mix. Like you said, they're not allowed to play that total cupcake schedule. So I think it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight in the ACC, which it always is. But this is a group, last year we speculated they might get 9 or 10 invitees to the NCAA. A little too early to be talking about that. But you've got certainly that many teams that look like they could qualify for the tournament.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Florida State just this last weekend pushed Duke again. I believe I remember watching that score during the Xavier game, and Florida State was ahead many times late in that game. I believe the Dukies ended up winning it by 4 or 5, but yeah, I think you're right. In Louisville, yeah, we don't know, how's that going to play out. They got other issues. You got Notre Dame in there that is a great team. UVA, Virginia Tech. Yeah, you're right. If they don't get 10 teams in, I would be surprised at just all the talent they have in that league. And parity.
Yeah, and very, as it always is, they beat up on each other like other two. Unfortunately, they do have the mixed schedule where they don't play each other twice like they used to. And but I'm going to stick with my champion. I think Duke is still going to be the one coming out on the top of there. They're just going to continue to get better every year as they mold those young guys with Grayson Allen and a couple of their leaders. They always seem to find those kids. Mike Krzyzewski has had to go to the one and done philosophy on some ways, like with Bagley, but he still finds kids that want to stay 3 or 4 years, and that leadership is going to get them there. And like I said, the Florida State game, whenever Duke comes to town, they have a target on the back. It's like the NFL being the New England Patriots. People just get fired up to play the Patriots. There's never an easy game on their schedule, and Duke's just going to have to slog it out through the rest. But I think they will emerge come March as the ACC championship.
I agree with you, and just what we talked about before. I think they're starting 4 one-and-dones, but they got Grayson Allen. Love or hate him. He's a player. He's kind of like J.P. McCary. He gives 100%, sometimes goes over the line. But I really think I've seen an interview with him before the season started and was really impressed with him, as you would not think. I'd never heard him speak before. He's very well-spoken. He understands what he did is wrong. He almost, it seems like he's so competitive that he can't control his emotions and his actions sometimes. But again, we're talking about you got to have that mix of youth that has all the talent, but a little bit of leadership that can keep things in check. So I would agree Duke's going to be a tough team to deal with when we come around to March.
Well, we're talking about just the first week and all the craziness that's happened, but this coming week, my good golly, I look at your Big 12. They've got 3 top 25 matchups coming up this weekend, and Oklahoma also has to play their in-state rival, Oklahoma State. The Big 10, you already mentioned Michigan State having to go to Columbus and play the Buckeyes, but also Purdue is going to play Nebraska, which has knocked off a couple teams and barely lost to Kansas by just 1. Of course, we talked about the Butler Xavier game tonight, which will be a big one heading into next week's Xavier team. So, and that's just your conferences. Now, in my conferences, not as many things because there's not a whole lot going on in the SEC, but in the ACC, you got North Carolina, Florida State top 25. We've got, Boston College is going to host Clemson. Who knows how that goes? Virginia's got to play in-state rival Virginia Tech and then turn around and host North Carolina, and Miami then hosts Florida State. So that's going to be something fantastic in the ACC. To me, the big game of that week will be watching that Virginia-UNC game on Saturday because they're both going to come off tough games on Wednesday. And the difference in the style where UNC likes to run a little bit and the Wahoos are just going to slow things down as much as humanly possible. So keep a key on that game, and and what about for you? I know tonight you'll be at the Butler Xavier game, but what else in your sort of palette are you looking for this week?
Well, I want to see again, is Kansas for real? Because I think tonight or tomorrow night they're hosting Texas Tech. It'll be at home, but they've lost a game to Arizona State in Fall Allen, so they could lose. It'll be interesting to see. Oklahoma at Oklahoma State. Can Trae Young, can he carry that team? I think that'll be a big test for them going on the road, big rival game. And again, is he enough to really make them a contender? In the Big East, I feel sorry. No, I don't. I'm going to take that back. I don't feel sorry. But look at this. Butler, they just hosted Villanova. Now they come and play the Xavier Musketeers. And on Saturday, they host Seton Hall. So the 3 games in a row within about a week, they are playing what most people think are the top 3 teams in the Big East. So it'll be interesting, if they can pull all 3 of those out, and they've already got one, obviously, by taking Villanova down. But if they could beat the Musketeers and the Pirates in succession, they'll definitely be a top 25, if not top 10 team, and will be a Butler to be reckoned with. And, again, I'm looking forward to that Michigan State-Ohio State game. Again, I think it's going to say a lot about each team. Ohio State has the home court advantage there, and it'll tell us, is Michigan State truly the number 1 team? Is Ohio State as good as maybe that we didn't think they were going to be? Has Chris Holtzman brought them around, and are they going to contend for the Big Ten championship? Because they do stand 2-0 already. And, of course, that again, the Oklahoma-West Virginia game is going to be a big one on Sunday in the Big 12.
Yeah, and you mentioned Kansas also has to head to Texas Christian after that game with Texas Tech, so a double Texas nightmare for them. But again, these are all just the games in the next week, and then the Pac-12, number 14 Arizona. You hope they don't suffer a letdown after that big win against Arizona State, as they play a quietly good Utah. And Saturday, I think we'll see what that young Kentucky team is about, as they've got to go to Knoxville and play the Volunteers, the number 23 Tennessee, or we may find out what Tennessee's all about. So again, not as much going on in my conference, two of my conferences than yours, but a lot of great games to watch this weekend, and hopefully a lot of great things to talk about when we get together next Tuesday on our next Trogcast. And, of course, we will be on the air on Thursday with our Razorcast, which is all things Xavier Musketeer basketball, with a lot of Big East thrown in there. So Jim will be able to talk a lot more about that Butler-Xavier game, as well as the Butler Villanova game, and a lot of things that are going on there. So any other final thoughts before we move on to our trivia and tidbits here?
Well, just one final comment. I was thinking when you're talking about Arizona State, I think they were kind of like, are they for real? They went to Fall Gallon and beat Kansas, and they took Arizona down to the wire. It was a 2-point game in the last minute, so they are for real. It's they're going to be a team I think is going to have to be reckoned with the entire year out in your Pac-12.
And I think that's great. Like I say, those schools are only about an hour and 15 minutes drive time apart, and they just haven't had that rivalry the way some of the other geographical, and that's the way the Pac-12 was set up. Of course, they kind of sneak in the Utah-Colorado thing, saying, okay, they're kind of rivals because they're close in the states, but everybody else has got that in-state rival, and to see that is just going to make it fun in the Pac-12 and what seems to be a bit of a down year. All right, lots of fun, lots of basketball in the new year. Maybe cold outside, but it's hot on the parquet. And I'm sure that you're going to try to heat up my mind a little bit with just a question or two on the trivia side.
Yes, I will. Yeah, it's a good thing because it's cold outside, so that's a good thing. There's lots of good basketball to watch. Hopefully get us through this next probably, 6 to 8 weeks, which is hopefully it's going to warm up a little bit. It's too cold already. Going on the line of something we talked about, undefeated teams. And, again, this was, as I've mentioned, was the first time since 1948-49 that no undefeated team made it into the new year of the basketball season. In fact, I read a little story this morning that on average, they did a study of the last 15 years. On average, one team or another would win 23 games before suffering a defeat. And obviously, we're at, about the 15 or 16 game point this year, and we don't have any undefeated teams. But my question will surround something with undefeated teams, and I'll give you a leeway of one very quickly. How many teams have gone through an undefeated season and won the NCAA?
Oh, you mean teams or colleges? Because I know UCLA had a couple.
Different seasons. How many seasons has it happened?
How many seasons? Okay. Well, the last one was Indiana. Of course, everybody's remember that. Everybody's trying to top that. And I believe UCLA had 3. 88-win streak. So I'm going to go with 2, probably 2, or they might have had another one before. I'll go with 2 there. And probably a couple. I'm only going to say around 5. So
you are wrong. It's 7. 1956, the San Francisco Dons. 1957, the North Carolina Tar Heels. Frank McGuire. 64, 67, 72, 73. The Bruins did it 4 times. That's where you went wrong.
Well,
and in
I can't compare for 3. I mean, come on.
76, the Hoosiers, of course, the last team to go undefeated and win the NCAA tournament again. And I think I've said on here before, I'm not sure it'll ever happen again, but you never know. And actually, I'd like to here's your second real deep question. There was actually one other team, and the story I was reading or the history I was reading, they don't really go prior to 1938-39 because there were a lot of undefeated teams, but they didn't necessarily play a lot of games, and a lot of the teams didn't travel a lot nationally. So when you talk about undefeated seasons, they start with the modern history. About 1938, I believe, was the first NCAA tournament. Might have been 39. But there was one other team. In 1939, Long Island University went undefeated and actually went to the NIT tournament instead of the NCAA because, as we've talked about before, at that time the NIT was a bigger tournament, especially if you're talking New York. But my mascot trivia, do you know the name of the Long Island University team in 1939 that won the NIT and went undefeated?
Oh, there's so many options. It's in on Long Island. Given the history, I'll say the Fishermen.
The Blackbirds.
Oh. Well,
Long Island University Blackbirds, 1939. I think they were like 24-0 or something like that.
Missed it by just a little bit.
Yeah. All right. I'm sure you got some trivia to finish us up for. Fans wait around for where are you going to go today?
Well, we just got a couple of nice tidbits. Yesterday in 1942 was the only time the Rose Bowl was not played on the West Coast. And if you want to read about that great article in Sports Illustrated a couple of years ago about how they had to move it due to the fact that it was just going to be weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Do you know where that game was played, Jim, perchance?
You know, I'm thinking I've read about that, and for some reason, North Carolina?
It was. It was played in North Carolina. At that time, the Pac-8, as they were called, before they turned into the Pac-10 and the Pac-12, the winner that was allowed to invite somebody to come, and they tried to avoid this team, which was Duke at that time. And then when they had to move the team, Duke said, well, if you want to come east, we'll host it. And they did have it on Duke Field. Actually had to bring in temporary stands from North Carolina and North Carolina State to fill it out. And but Oregon State did beat. They were number 12, beat the number 2 Duke Blue Devils 20-16. And it's a great story, like I said, in Sports Illustrated a couple of years ago about how that all happened, and they made it come to it. And on this date, 1965, in honor of what's going on in NFL football, it was the day the New York Jets signed Joe Namath of Alabama to his big contract, which sort of put the AFL on the map for the money that was going to go. And in 1993, in honor of a couple things, one, the NFL playoffs are coming up, and the Buffalo Bills return to the playoffs, first time since 1999. I don't know if you saw this, Jim, very funny. Andy Dalton's charity is being deluged with donations from Buffalo due to the Bengals beating the Ravens the other day and allowing Buffalo to get back to the playoffs for the first time since 1999. But it was in 1993 that quarterback Frank Reich brought the Buffalo Bills back from a 32-point deficit to win over the Houston Oilers 41-38 in overtime. And that's the greatest playoff comeback ever in the NFL. And we wish the Bills well in going back to the playoffs for the first time in 18 years. Sadly, those of us in Cincinnati remember our football droughts well. We will be back on the air with our weekly Trogcast next Tuesday. Look for us on the Grueling Truth website. Of course, you know where that is if you're listening now. The way to get to it. And on Thursday, we will have our Razorcast on all things Musketeer basketball. Till then, try to stay warm, everybody, and enjoy a fantastic week of NCAA basketball.
We'll see you.